Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast with my guest today, Paul Leary from the Butthole Surfers. If you like what you hear today, be sure to follow the show, rate it, like it, share it with everyone you know. You can also follow along on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates about upcoming episodes. Today, we're brought to you by Metro, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee. Stop by their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or stop by MetroJeep.com and drive home in your new Metro, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram today.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast.
My guest today is one of the most important guitar players ever from one of the most notorious bands in America. And while he may not agree with that assessment personally, those of us who have been paying attention over the years will go to our grave strongly believing otherwise. His name is Paul Leary, and the name of the band is the Butthole Surfers. Now, admittedly, I've gone out of my way to introduce or to reintroduce some of you to some pretty damn weird stuff in this podcast. Stuff like Devo, Skafish, Sparks, The Residents, maybe even a few others along the way. However, being weird is not always such a bad thing. Sometimes weird can be remarkably refreshing, even if sometimes experiencing weirdness in person will scare the living shit out of you. The Butthole Surfers were that kind of band, a band loaded with paradoxes, a band that can be brilliant and obnoxious, melodic and noisy, experimental and ridiculous, hilarious and frightening, sometimes all at the same time. Now, who doesn't love something like that? Their records were completely original. Their live performances, legendary, skirting somewhere between genius and recklessly dangerous. In fact, many will argue that the Butthole Surfers were possibly the greatest live band of all time. They enjoyed releasing hits such as the song Pepper from their 1996 album Electric Larryland. They've also released records with absolutely no commercial viability whatsoever, and yet they're still great and inventive and wildly experimental. Either way, they spent the last 45 years not really giving a damn about perceptions or preconceived notions, because Paul Leary and lead singer Gibby Haynes and everyone else that's ever contributed to the Butthole Surfers over the years have only operated on their own terms, no matter how insane or deviant or hilarious those terms might seem. And it's freaking awesome. But don't kid yourself. Paul Leary is much more than that. He's not only an amazing guitar player, he's also a guy with a load of insane production credits that include Stone Temple Pilots, The Flaming Lips, and John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin. He's also produced massively successful records for Sublime and the Meat Puppets. He's even received production credits and music from U2, Jane's Addiction, Weezer, Toadies, and many, many others. The Butthole Surfers are about to release a new live album this month entitled Live from the Leather Fly. It's a show that dates back to 1991, even though there's not a lot of details out there about this particular show itself, yet it's still amazing to listen to. They've also been the subject of a brand new documentary that was shown at South by Southwest earlier this year called Butthole Surfers, The Whole Truth and Nothing But. To talk about all of that is my guest today, legendary guitarist Paul Leary from the Butthole Surfers on Baxie's Musical Podcast.
Hey, hope I'm not late.
No, are you kidding? You're right on. In fact, you're 3 minutes early.
I'm the rare musician that's always early.
Well, I appreciate you joining me today. I'll start right into it because, in a way, I think my introduction to the Butthole Surfers is actually kind of funny. My first exposure came in college. This would have been like 86, 87. I was in college radio at a Jesuit Catholic college, and I remember this very serious discussion about whether we could even say the name Butthole Surfers on a Catholic college radio station, and whether we could even play the opening to Sweet Loaf, because if there's one thing Jesuits can't stand is the invocation of Satan multiple times. I don't remember how the conversation ended, but I'm pretty sure we played it because we knew nobody was listening, and that was like the gateway for me and the Butthole Surfers. So I want to thank you for that indelible memory. I've never forgotten that.
Well, I'm glad we could get onto the Catholic Jesuit radio.
Well, you did, and it was glorious. But you guys are releasing Live from the Leather Fly. I know that the details of this record or this performance are a little sketchy, and some of it is fictitious, of course. Tell me what you can about the Leather Fly.
Well, the Leatherfly was a fictitious club that Gibby Haynes made up, and he used to talk about it a lot. Gibby made up a fictitious club called the Leatherfly, 30 years ago, and so we used to always make up fake band names just to amuse ourselves. And when we came up with one that made us laugh, we would always say that they were live at the Leatherfly. And Gibby fantasized about a club with a giant stuffed leather fly out front. And we had these 2-inch tapes recorded from a live concert in like 1991, sitting in my storage space for years and years and years. And one day I just decided I wanted to empty out that storage space, and I sent those tapes off to get transferred to digital and was able to mix an album out of it.
When you heard those tapes again, I mean, obviously 1991 is a long time ago. I mean, what was your thought about that performance? Did you say, this is better than I thought, or this is better or as good as I thought? What was your thought about it?
It was not one of our better performances, I don't think, but it was fairly typical. We were probably, drunk and stoned and all that. And you can tell listening to it, but that's how we rolled.
The first single off of it is the Annoying Song, which is funny about it because it may actually be more annoying than the original one from Independent Worm Saloon, which I love that song and I love that record, but it sounds absolutely insane how he's doing this how you're all doing this song live.
Yeah, that song started off like in 1991. We were on the first Lollapalooza tour, and somebody gave Gibby a little toy megaphone that would pitch his voice up an octave, and he was going around just annoying everybody. And he came up with this little chant, and I just thought the chant was hysterical. So I immediately, thought we have to make this a song, and I came up with a couple of chords to play to it. And Gibby, when he performs, he has rack mount effects units that he manipulates, and he can pitch his voice up and down, and he does it quite a bit. And so, it's fairly easy to pull off live. It's not a hard song to play.
But to hear it live and then compare it to the studio version, it just sounds so much more intense, and his voice just sounds so much more ridiculous. And it's fantastic the way you guys pulled that off.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I loved it. So, I was hoping to get a chance to see the documentary before I had a chance to talk to you, the whole truth and nothing but. It didn't work out quite that way, but I can't wait to see it because YouTube documentaries hardly do the band justice. How weird is it for you to look back and to relive all of that footage? And also, how weird is it to watch people on this film talk about how influential you are? Is that like an odd experience for you?
It's a little bit odd. I mean, I've been hearing people say that for years, and I always just thought they were lying to me, to try to, be kind. Nobody's going to tell you that they hate your band and that you're really stupid or something. But yeah, it was gratifying to hear people actually say that in a movie format. And we went to a premiere a couple of weeks ago at South by Southwest, and I was just really surprised. The audience reacted really well to the movie, which I was a nervous wreck beforehand because I've seen some rock documentaries that kind of fall flat and don't. They're not interesting, and who wants to hear a bunch of, famous people talking about, a band they like? But I thought it was really well edited and put together, and yeah, it was an emotional roller coaster making it and watching it.
Are you naturally one of these nostalgic types, or are you more one of those "what the hell were we thinking" kind of people?
What the hell were we thinking? I mean, it's not like we really had a choice, and I graduated from college and didn't get a job. And so my choice was either work at the lumberyard or be in the Butthole Surfers. And I chose the latter. And we just did what we could do. And we turned out the way we did.
I think one of the things that is so fascinating to me about you guys is, anybody can put a band together. Not everybody is going to put together something like the Butthole Surfers. What is it about you and Gibby that said, okay, well, this is what we're going to do? How did that even germinate to take the opportunity to make this incredibly experimental, often hilarious, sometimes dangerous band?
No, we just kind of fell into it. Gibby and I we met at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas in the late 70s. And I think like around 1979, Gibby and I went to Venice Beach in California and sold Lee Harvey Oswald T-shirts on the beach. we got those iron-on things that you could print up your own designs and iron them on shirts. And we had Lee Harvey Oswald T-shirts and Lee Harvey Oswald pillowcases and bed sheets, and we were able to sell enough of them on Venice Beach to buy pot and beer. And that lasted for a summer, and then we came home, and Gibby wanted to make a band, and I was kind of reluctant. I'd been playing guitar since I was 5 years old, but I gave it up in college thinking, I'm never going to be a rock star. Why bother? And then after I graduated, Gibby wanted to put a band together, and I was reluctant. And then one day I just said, to hell with it, and went to a band rehearsal, I guess you could call it that, and started playing again and got hooked immediately. And before long, we were doing an art gallery in San Antonio. We were more of an art performance band than a rock band, and it was all about art performance. And then we kind of just graduated into being a rock band.
So what was it initially that led you guys to get allied with each other? Obviously, there's a major connection artistically and musically between you two. What was it that made that happen?
Well, we both liked punk rock and new wave music. There wasn't a whole lot of that at Trinity University at the time, and Gibby kind of stood out on campus. He was 6'5" or 6'7" or whatever the hell he is, and he was spiky black hair and a black biker jacket, and so he kind of stood out. And one day we just started hanging out, and he had a really nice Pioneer stereo and a bunch of cool records, and we discovered a common love for the Ramones and Joy Division and that kind of stuff. And so we started listening to music together and smoking pot together. And then one day I went to a record store and I bought a Meat Puppets single, like a 7-inch, and it had the songs Out in the Gardener and In a Car. And I remember putting that on the turntable, and it just sounded like a train wreck. It was just awesome. And I was like, well, we could do that, and I want to do that. And so that's kind of what we did.
It is impossible, and I'm sure the documentary addresses this quite a lot. It's impossible to talk about the two of you and the Butthole Surfers without talking about the band as a live act, because anyone who has ever seen you live, they either say it's the greatest thing they ever saw, or it scared the living shit out of them. It was, there's not a whole lot,
or both.
Yeah, if on a good show, on a good night, you got both out of you, but there's not a whole lot of in between. Tell me about those early live shows and how it would develop over the course of time.
Well, we didn't have any money, and we played our first few shows, and we were just a band on stage, and then we saved up like $12 and bought a Radio Shack strobe light. And had fun with that. And the next thing we knew, we had like 6 or 7 of them on stage. So we had all these cheap strobe lights flashing, and we were touring with that. And then noticed we were having to stop our shows to let paramedics come in and treat people with epilepsy because our strobe lights were causing epileptic seizures. And, we'd always been told that strobe lights had to be really fast to trigger an epileptic seizure. And we thought, well, these aren't fast strobes, it'll be fine. But later we found out that if you have several strobes and they aren't synced up, that can also cause it. So we graduated to professional strobes, really bright strobes with a controller that would have them all flashing at the same time, and no more epileptic seizures after that. And then we hooked up with Rick Linklater, who did some shows for us as a projectionist. He, I think he brought in, or we got a hold of some 16 millimeter projectors, and Rick brought in a movie called Epileptic Seizure Comparisons, which shows some guy with a shaved head just kind of like spazzing out. And it looked great behind us. And so we started collecting films, and we used some of those Highways of Death education films they show you in driver's ed to scare you out of driving recklessly. And so there was Mangled Bodies and Epileptic Seizure Comparisons. And then we got a hold of a movie that was a medical movie about penis reconstruction surgery, which showed a man's mangled genitalia from a tractor accident. And by the end of the movie, his penis was reconstructed and put back together again. So it had a very happy ending.
Yeah, it's a heartwarming story.
It's a heartwarming story. Unfortunately, though, our projectionist never had time to rewind the films at the end of the night, so he would run them backwards the next night, and so it would have a bad ending. But The next thing you know, we've got 3 projectors and we're, shining Charlie's Angels with penis reconstruction surgery and epileptic seizure comparisons and all at the same time. And so it was kind of really strange. And then we had enough strobes it was like a nuclear weapon. We had this screen that would fold up towards the end of the show and revealing this wall of strobe lights, the airport grade. And when those things started going off, brighter and brighter and brighter, you couldn't block it out of you. You could put your hands in front of your eyes and you would see the bones and veins in your hand. And there was nothing you could do about it. And we got really industrial smoke machines that would just obliterate wherever we were playing. The cool thing about those smoke machines was the smoke would come billowing out all at once, and the projectionist would pull back on the focus of the projectors so that they would stay in focus on the smoke cloud as it was billowing out, and that was a really great effect.
That's unbelievable. But it's amazing because you talk about all the things that you're adding to the show, and over time, I mean, there's nudity, there's gunfire, there's setting stuff on fire. I mean, promoters must have just loved the hell out of you guys every time you came into town.
No, the fire marshals would, finally figured out that they needed to come check us out before the show. But that was kind of strange. We'd show up to play and there'd be a fire marshal waiting, and he would want to look at our shotgun and we had something called a fire symbol where we had this broken symbol from the drum kit. And Gibby figured out if you put it upside down and filled it with flammable liquid and set it on fire, that he could hit the symbol and it would make this mushroom ball of flame come out of it. And so they wanted to inspect the flammable liquid and the shotgun, and nobody ever stopped us. And I can't believe we got away with it. I cannot imagine anybody getting away with that now, after what happened in Providence with White Snake or whoever it was.
Great White,
burn the club down. I can't believe we didn't burn a club down. I mean, we were so lucky. A guardian angel was looking over us.
Over the course of time, when you're putting together shows like that, I mean, I have to believe that there's this natural inclination to want to be more outrageous and maybe more threatening and add more, effects to these shows. I mean, that's not only dangerous, but it puts a hell of a lot of pressure on you guys to come up with those kinds of ideas and situations. How much did all of that eventually contribute to you no longer wanting to tour anymore?
Well, there wasn't really pressure to keep adding to it because, you get to the point where you're setting the stage on fire every night, and the smoke and the films. I mean, you kind of reach a point where that's enough. And I remember home off tour one time, I fell asleep in front of the TV set at 2:00 in the morning. I wake up to the TV set flashing. And I look up and I see this flashing light off the TV, and it's a rock band playing, and there's belching flames and explosions and stuff. And I thought, now that's a rock show. And then, oh, wait a second, that's us. And then 9/11 happened, and just right then and there, I kind of got tired of the violent episodes in our shows. It was no longer appealing to me. So it did have a lot to do with not wanting to play anymore.
It was always my impression, and maybe this is real or just my own thought about it, but it always seemed to me that no matter where you guys were performing or what you were doing or what you were recording, no matter who you were with or what record company you were working for, nobody was ever really going to tell the Butthole Surfers to sit there and be told what to do. Like there was a certain element of like a desire for defiance, and almost like we don't give a shit type of reaction. Is there truth to any of that, or is that kind of like an exaggeration?
No, it's true. I mean, we got all the way to being signed on a major label. We signed with Capitol Records, which to me was the biggest trip of all. The same label as the Beatles and Beach Boys and Dean Martin and Grand Funk Railroad and on and on. And then there's the thought that the Butthole Surfers could be in that esteemed group was just too funny. There's no way we'd pass that up. So we're on Capitol Records, and they didn't know what to do with this. So they just left us alone, and we just continued doing our thing until we had a hit song. We had a song called Pepper that went to #1 on the modern rock charts and had a #1 MTV video back when MTV played videos. And then next thing you know, there's a line around the block of people at the label telling us what to do and how to do it. And so that was kind of weird. It's like, wait a second, we just made a #1 song and now you're going to tell us what to do. And we really weren't fit to be on a major label, and I didn't get along with the president of the label very well, and so that didn't last that long after that.
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of part of the monster of major labels. You know, once they get the whiff of cash from any band they're working with, they just want a second helping of it. And it seemed to be that was kind of a real hard thing for you guys to recover from, because I mean, you tried to record another record, it wound up being shelved, and then it took a couple of years before you followed up that album. When you guys had the hit with Pepper, as a fan, I was happy for you, but on the other hand, I kept thinking, I couldn't believe this was happening. Like, how did this band that had been so experimental and so aggressively non-commercial and so many things that they had done, how does this even happen? I guess the question I really want to ask first in this is, first of all, how did Capitol even get involved with you guys? I mean, I know you left Touch and Go and now you're with Capitol, but how did this even, I mean, it's the most bizarre thing I could have even imagined back in the 90s that the Capitol would have any interest in you guys.
Well, when we signed, the president of Capitol Records was Hale Milgram, who was a real music guy and a cool guy, which meant he wasn't going to last there forever. Gibby was at a Starbucks in line to get a cup of coffee, and he gets a tap on his shoulder and turns around, and it was Hale Milgram. He's like, "Hey, how would you like to be on Capitol Records?" It's like, hell yeah. And he came to our shows in New York and signed us up to his label, and then got fired.
Yeah.
And then Gary Gersh took over, and I didn't know much about Gary Gersh other than he seemed to take a lot of credit for Nirvana, which I don't know how justified that was. But in any event, we do Pepper, and the album goes gold, and he calls us up to his office to congratulate us. And so I was like, oh, that's cool. Maybe he's a cool guy after all. And we get to his office, and he makes us wait for like 20 minutes before he'd let us in. And then we go in there, and there's a bunch of the Capitol people in this office, and there's probably 40 people in there, and we're kind of milling around, and I'm looking around feeling a little out of place, and then Gary Gersh walks up to me and he goes, "Hi, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Gary Gersh, and I just want you to know I really respect what you do." And I was like, "Wow, cool, thanks." And so I'm feeling pretty good about that. And literally like 5 minutes later, he walks up to me again and goes, "Hi, I'm Gary Gersh. I just want you to know I really respect what you do." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I see how this goes."
It's weird because, like around the late 80s, early 90s, there were all these, for lack of a better term, alternative or college radio bands that were being signed by major labels, Sonic Youth, Husker Du. I mean, bands that were just seen as kind of like, I don't know, like almost like trophies in a way for like, Warner Brothers and big records and big bands like that. Did you get the sense that that's one of the reasons that they had signed you, is they wanted that cachet of people knowing, hey, we got the Butthole Surfers and you don't?
Absolutely. Like I was talking about Gary Gersh, he was with, I think it was Interscope Records before Capitol. And our manager had shopped us to Interscope and shopped us to Gary Gersh. And Gary's response was, "No, I already have Sonic Youth." So you just need one of those bands, to try to be cool or something. Yeah, it was weird.
When you guys recorded Pepper, it is, comparatively speaking, at the time, it was clearly the most commercially accessible song that you had recorded. Were you surprised by the success of it? I mean, did it ever occur to you that that was a possibility? And how did you react when you found out, oh my God, we got a gold record here?
It's like a dream, nothing seemed real for those years. I just kept expecting Candid Camera to come popping out with Alan Funk, and it did not seem real. And then Pepper was an afterthought on the record. We had all the songs for an album written and rehearsed before we went into the studio, and we went in with Steve Thompson as producer, who did like Guns N' Roses and things like that, and we're recording our songs, and Steve's like, we need one more song, and I kind of heard rumors that that's what producers were going to do, is tell you need one more song, and so it's like, well, what do you want? And he's like, play a guitar riff, and it's like, okay, what key would you like? And he goes, G. So I played a riff in G, and they came up with a drum beat to it, and Gibby wrote lyrics, and then we brought in Mark Edinger to play some keyboards on it. And Gibby did not like the way it turned out, but he wasn't around, so it was weird.
So when it becomes the hit, and you talked about how the reaction now they want to tell you what to do. I would assume that there was a rejection of that, and that relationship did sour. How did that end with Capitol? What was the conversation like? Was it just you're out, or was it like a negotiation?
It wasn't so much us. It was we had a manager that at the time we hired him, he had been sober for a few years. And then around that time we were on Capitol, he slipped back into drug abuse and became impossible to deal with, especially from the label's point of view. And so we had an entire album recorded for Capitol. They already accepted it and were glad to have it. And they were sending out promo copies and the whole bit. And our manager wrecked our relationship with the label, and then they just dropped us. And by dropped us, that doesn't mean we were free to go somewhere else. It meant we couldn't do anything. They still owned us. So it was like 3 years we were unable to release an album with anybody. And then Hollywood Records came along and bought out the rights and saved the day for us. But they wanted the album to be different than what we recorded for Capitol. So we had to go back into the studio and re-record a bunch of these songs, and that was weird and not a fun experience. And so the record's not that much fun. It's probably our worst album.
But it's interesting how that had it not been for the management issue, would you have chosen to stay with Capitol?
Hell yeah. I liked being on Capitol. I mean, this really a lot of fun to go smoke a joint on the roof of that round building. And no, it was fun. I met a lot of good people at Capitol, and it was fun being people would ask if we were going to be corporate rock, and we were like, well, we already are, man. I mean, this is it.
You mentioned the job of a producer is to say, we need one more song or one more hit, or I don't hear a hit, or whatever it may be. But as the band kind of fizzles out a little bit or goes to the next phase, you start picking up a lot of work in production. I mean, your production credits are amazing. I mean, from producing the Meat Puppets, who we've already talked about before and how important they were for you, and Sublime, but also a lot of the other production stuff you did with U2 and the Flaming Lips. How did you get involved in production? What led from you being a member of a band to now you're on a production team?
Well, the Butthole Surfers really never had much of a recording budget, so we decided what we really wanted to do is just buy recording equipment and record at our own house. And we bought recording equipment, and then I was the guy that worked with it all the time. Everybody else wanted to go off and do fun things, and all I wanted to do was be in the studio. I love the studio. It's the one place where you can be in charge and in control of your environment. And second you step outside of the studio, that's not the case anymore. And, nobody else in the band really liked recording as much as I did. And I just loved it. And, I was producing Butthole Surfer records, and I didn't know what a producer was. I didn't know what the word meant. And then I fell in with this band called the Bad Livers, which was a bluegrass band out of Austin. And they were a whole lot of fun. They were great live and great songwriting. And Danny Barnes, who's the most amazing banjo player in the whole world. And I told him, hey, I'll front the studio money if you'll let me produce an album. And they went for that. So the first band outside the Butthole Surfers that I produced was the Bad Livers. And then the Meat Puppets, we became friends with the Meat Puppets, and the Meat Puppets were signed to a major label before us. And they'd already recorded an album, and then they were going to do another album for their label. And they called me up to see if I would ask John Paul Jones if he'd be interested in producing them. And so I said, sure. And I thought John Paul Jones would want to do it for sure, because I played the Meat Puppets for him a lot when we were working together. And he said no. So I had to call the Meat Puppets and give them the bad news. And they were like, oh, well, would you want to do it? And I was like, hell yeah, I'd want to do it. And that produced an album called Too High to Die, and it went gold. And so I had a career in production. That was awesome. And then like a year or two later, I'm working with Sublime. Sublime liked the Meat Puppets, and so I ended up producing Sublime, and that was really strange, because as Pepper moved to number one on the charts, right as the Sublime album came out, the self-titled album came out, and they started moving up the charts. So as Pepper started to fall off the charts, Sublime came right up there and passed it up and also made it high on the charts. And that was just a bizarre time, to have two bands on the Billboard charts at the same time. That was 1996. And that was the year my mom died and our dog, Mark Farner, died. And so it was a pretty rotten year, but these good things were happening. It was strange.
It has to be like really satisfying when you talked about like the Meat Puppets and how important they were to you and the kind of career that they had, very non-traditional. Early stuff is not necessarily all that commercial, but yet, they had their biggest hit with you. I mean, that had to be really satisfying for a guy who had been a fan for years.
Oh, it was awesome. I remember getting the phone call when, the A&R person from, I forget what label they were on, called up to say that the record had gone gold. And I just almost exploded. It's like my first gold record, just unbelievable. Those are great, great days.
So you got to tell me about how John Paul Jones comes into the sphere here, because I mean, I know back in the 90s, he was producing a bunch of stuff and a lot of alternative bands. I mean, The Mission, he did a few others. But how did he come into the Butthole Surfers?
We were shopping for a producer, and at that point, we were doing so well on the road that every A-list producer out there wanted to do it. We could have picked anybody. We could have had Andy Wallace or Mike Beinhorn or you name it. We could have had anybody. And Lee Lust, our A&R guy at Capitol, sent a demo to John Paul Jones and then called me up and said, "Hey, would you consider John Paul Jones?" And I was like, "Oh my God, yes." And I'm not sure how the rest of the band felt about it, but I was really adamant. It's like, man, I'm not going to go to my grave knowing that I could have worked with John Paul Jones, but didn't. So that was just, I had to go there. And then that turned into a really great experience. He was a lot of fun to work with.
You said he had heard some of your music. He hadn't seen you guys live or anything like that, had he?
I don't think so. He knew he had an album called Airway to Steven.
Yeah.
And he brought that up to me, and I'd forgotten about that. And it took me a second to realize what the joke was. And I was like, oh yeah, okay.
But working with him was a positive experience, though.
Absolutely. I mean, I learned a lot from him as a producer because, he came to Austin and spent like a week with us in our rehearsal room, going over the songs and jamming out with us. And man, jamming with John Paul Jones, that's a trip. And then we get to the studio, and I never walked into the control room when he wasn't in there. He was there for everything that went down and was just on top of everything. And so that kind of influenced me as a producer, because not all producers are like that. When we were on Hollywood Records, we worked with Rob Cavallo, who's a fantastic producer, and Green Day and producer of the year at the Grammys. But he would show up on Tuesday and walk in and listen to a few minutes and go, "Okay, do this, this, and this," and I gotta go to my daughter's recital. I'll be back next week. And so it's like, wait a second, who's running the show here? I guess I am again. But you can't knock with that approach because he's so damn good at it. But I always respected John Paul Jones and that he was really on top of everything and shaped how that record sounded. And so, we've remained friends ever since.
It's always amazing to me in Led Zeppelin. He's the most forgotten musician in that band, but he's probably the best musician in that band.
Absolutely.
I mean, just listening to the bass runs and the Immigrant Song, if you really listen carefully, going, holy shit, did he just do what I thought he did? Unbelievable talented guy.
The first time I heard Led Zeppelin, I was in like junior high school or whatever. And I was listening to FM radio on the headphones when my parents were asleep. And I remember when Whole Lot of Love came on, and I'd never heard Led Zeppelin or that song before. And I was just floored by it. I just couldn't wait to hear who that band was. And I found out it was Led Zeppelin. And so the next morning I skipped school and jumped on a bus and went to the mall to buy the record. And I think I had like $4 in my pockets to buy the album, and got there and found out that it was more expensive than the other records. It was $5. And I was like, I was so bummed out. So I had to go home and then skip school the next day with another $1 in my pocket to buy that album, and then opening it up and seeing the names of the band members and seeing John Paul Jones and going, ooh, cool,
That's
but
awesome.
back then I couldn't really hear the bass that well. On most stereo, they didn't have good low end on the speakers, and then one day I listened to something remastered, and I could hear the bass clear as a day, and I was like, "Oh my God, that guy is the Muhammad Ali of the bass world. He floats like a butterfly and stings like a bee.
Yeah,
He's just stunning."
He's absolutely phenomenal. It's a shame he doesn't get the credit that he deserves because my God, he's so fantastic.
And it's not just the bass; it's the mandolin, it's the keyboards, and then his sense of arrangement and stuff. He's the complete package.
Yeah. You did some other production stuff too, and I'll just touch on it real briefly. I mean, you mixed stuff for the Flaming Lips, but also U2. Tell me what that was all about.
Yeah, I was working with an old drummer from Nine Inch Nails. He was doing remixes for bands, and he gets this job to do to submit an idea for a U2 remix, and he worked on it with his friend, and they re-recorded the guitars and a bunch of stuff and sent it in, and that was what U2 chose, but they wanted to play the instruments themselves. I was going to mix it for them, but they said, no, we got to re-record the instruments. We want to do it all. So we rented a fancy studio in Burbank, and they flew in on their 707 jet or whatever it was during their tour and spent a couple of days in the studio. And I'm there, I thought I was going to be a mixer, and then I'm there at the studio to record U2, and I'm not a recording engineer. I was able to record Butthole Surfers because I didn't know what I was doing, and that was part of the joy of it. But all of a sudden, I'm in the studio with U2 and trying miking up a drum kit and a guitar and a bass, and I'm like having to explain to the guys, hey, be patient. This is my first time doing this, and they're all like, "What?" They were good humor. Edge did not know who I was until after the second day, as we were getting ready to leave the studio. Verena turns to him and goes, "Do you know who this is?" He pointed at me, and they were like, "No." And he goes, "This is Paul Leary." And Edge was like, "Oh, you're the guitar player for the Jack Officers." And that floored me because I was the guitar player for the Jack Officers. But I mean,
and he knew.
And he knew. I was like, "How the hell did you know that?"
That's amazing.
Yeah, they were cool dudes. They were fun to work with.
So you've released a couple of solo albums over the years. One in 1991, The History of Dogs, and also Born Stupid in 2021. With all the attention that's going to be on the Butthole Surfers with the release of the new record, the Live from the Leather Fly, and the documentary, have you and Gibby talked at all about the idea of potentially making new music in the future, or is there stuff that you would consider on your own to release later on?
Well, we talked about it over the years, and a few years ago, we thought we were going to give this a try, and I'd come up with some musical ideas that I'd started, and I sent them to him and didn't really get much response back. And then after a while, I realized, no, it's not going to happen. So I had all this stuff that I'd started working on, and so I just went on ahead and finished it myself and called it Born Stupid and released that as a solo album. So, it's a young man's game, and we're past our time to do that kind of stuff.
And you've already talked about how at this point you're touring and playing live. That is also a young man's game.
It sure is. But, I see footage of the Rolling Stones playing shows, and they're like, 90 years old or something. And I just think it's embarrassing. It's like, I know people go to their shows and it's great and all that, but their songs are about half the speed as they were when they released them the first time. And it just looks like a bunch of old men on stage. And I don't want to be one of those guys. And so, no, we had our good run, and we're getting big money offers to play too. It's like, oh my God, it's almost hard turning that stuff down. But thank goodness we can turn it down, and we are turning it down.
Last year, I did an interview with John Doe of X, and they were on their final tour, and he didn't take me up on it. I said, I was willing to pay him and the members of the band a check in the amount of $375 for them to continue to play, and I never heard back. So I'm going to guess that.
Well, think about it.
Well, I mean, if you split four ways, I mean, that's a hard offer to walk away from. But,
yeah, especially after you pay for the roadies and the rehearsal space and all that other stuff. Right. We saw Gibby and I went and saw X at the Whiskey A Go Go in like 79 or 80 or something like that, before we were in the Butthole Surfers. And, I put on my new wave clothes and went to the show, and there was this band of girls out front handing out flyers to their show, and they were called the Castration Squad. And they looked like they were set to kill somebody. I mean, they were just like handing out their flyers, but they were scowling and kicking people in the balls. And I thought those girls were going to stab me to death or something. But I remember the Castration Squad more than I remember X from that night.
But that's a good concept. That would have been a good thing for the Butthole Surfers to do. Yeah, I mean, you already talked about penis reconstruction surgery. Imagine that.
Yeah, at least that had a happy ending.
Well, Paul, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. I can't wait to see this documentary. I'm sure it's fantastic, and I appreciate you spending some time to talk about all this stuff today. So thank you.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on. It's fun talking to you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Best of luck.
We'll need it.
Thanks, Paul. Take care now.
Thanks a lot.
The name of the new record from the Butthole Surfers is Live from the Leather Fly. It'll be released this Friday, May 9th. Also, keep your eyes open for the new documentary, Butthole Surfers, The Whole Truth and Nothing But. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. You can email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again to Metro, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram of Chicopee for their support, but most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.